Well, Neil Brown said it. The West Virginia Mountaineers finally played to perfection. The West Virginia Mountaineers finally provided that picture of where the program's headed, of what the program could be. And honestly, this is a game that the Mountaineers played maybe the best they have all season. Going back to the Kansas State game too, Neil Brown talked about this in his post-game press conference today against TCU, a 24-6 victory for the Mountaineers, and that victory over then number 16 Kansas State. Certainly big wins, but it shows what the program can be. It shows where the program's headed. And yes, there's that bad Texas Tech loss. Yes, there's other games where they didn't close, even though they were to quality teams in Texas and Oklahoma State. But the Mountaineers, I think the takeaway here is the Mountaineers are light years from where they were a season ago. This is the West Virginia Postgame Show here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. And of course, this will also be available at WVU Sports Now. I'm your host, as always, Mike Asti. And again, this is a Mountaineers team that is headed in the right direction. I feel that way. The Texas Tech loss is bad. I did a recent show on how these bad losses cannot outnumber the big wins. The big wins need to outnumber those bad losses to make Neil Brown's tenure different than his predecessor, no matter what the situation is with COVID, the scandal of Vic Koenig, and even the fact the cupboard being bare, certainly more bare than it was for Dana Holgorsen when he took over and had that big Orange Bowl victory over Clemson. But still, nonetheless, he's going to get tons of rope. He's going to have a long leash. Shane Lyons and that program is in lockstep with him. He will have a chance to have success here. He will have years after this, I'm sure, to get to turn things around, but not forever, certainly. And this year needed to be a sign of improvement. It needed to be better than last year. You're seeing that with players emerging. Lady Brown, of course, emerging after the running game just got awful last year. The defense being number one in the country at different times this year after being, again, okay last year, but not nearly to this level. And they're doing it this year without a defensive coordinator, with all the controversy. Jarret Doege, we'll get to him here later on in the show. He's been performing really, really well, 300-plus yards for him almost seemingly every week. A solid, efficient day today, almost that point guard on the field. Didn't have a great day going back home to Lubbock, Texas against Texas Tech, and that's the bad loss. But when he plays at least efficient enough, they have a chance to win. Maybe that was just homecoming jitters in him. I don't know. Maybe too much pressure was on him there. Nonetheless, he's shown he is much better and much more suited for this team as a winning team than Austin Kendall a year ago. And the offensive line, that doesn't get tons of credit, has been way better this year, which helps everybody else as well, even Winston Wright emerging as maybe that wide receiver threat. So as Neil Brown said, this Mountaineer team has shown you pictures, has shown you glimpses of what it can be to the future, of where it is headed. And that's the Kansas State win. That's this win here over TCU. That's an undefeated home record to this point. Clearly way better than last season. The bad losses can't happen. Still needs to prove it's different than his predecessor. But this shows you at least the peak of the program potentially under Neil Brown. I don't want to say the peak of the program. You obviously hope bowl games and maybe bigger bowl games and that type of championship situation. But in terms of level of play and how they played, it was really efficient. It was lucky. It was almost the best it can be at right now at this time with how young this team still is. So I think that's a solid takeaway here. Again, Mike Asti on the WVU Postgame Show here on Pittsburgh Sports Live. West Virginia now moving to 5-3 on the year. They stay in that Big 12 title picture, as crazy as that sounds, and that includes the Texas Tech loss, because a lot of teams have had bad losses already. It's been a conference of chaos this year, despite already basically being eliminated from the college football playoff. So the Mountaineers still there. TCU would have been there really with the win today. That's how chaotic this conference is. So again, the West Virginia Mountaineers get the victory. I'm going to get Cody back on here in a second. I do see he just joined me here as he was finishing up that post-game coverage over there at WV Sports Now. So I will bring on Cody here and see if Cody can hear me. Hey, Cody, man, how you doing?
Hey, Mike.
Hey, all right. So Cody Nespor here again of WV Sports Now, our post-game show. Mountaineers 24-6 winners. And now moving to 5-3 on the year, staying in that Big 12 race, as chaotic as the conference has been. Cody, I kind of touched on here in my open that, as Neil Brown said, and I listened in on that Zoom session that you were attending, that this game really shows where the program's headed. It shows kind of the picture of where this team can be. Still a very young team, still room to grow, but individually speaking, overall together, efficiency-wise, they played obviously really, really well. And taking this game, Kansas State as well, it shows where the program can be. You still hate to see that Texas Tech loss, but it's a young team. And this should give Mountaineer fans a lot of reason for optimism, even though they certainly still need to finish the season strong. What's the main takeaway for you?
I think just what you said, like Neil was talking about, is this game kind of shows exactly where Neil wants the program to be. Really the blueprint for him building this program to the future. And then the most optimistic thing to me is if you look on both sides of the ball, just at all the young players that are playing really well, that's a great source of optimism. You talk about Tyke Smith. Neil keeps saying one of the best, slot corners, box safeties in the country. Akeem Mesidor, the young tackles on the offensive line, the young receivers. There's just a lot of reason for optimism. And when you look at the team like that, there's no reason to think they're not going to continue to improve.
Yeah, to say the least. I mean, this is, again, a Mountaineer team that was entering this season very, very young, coming off of a really miserable season last year. They couldn't run the ball. They couldn't protect. The offensive line was horrible, and the quarterback play was certainly suspect. Jarret Doege, to me, has certainly proved that he can be the guy to lead this team to the promised land potentially. When he plays well, they are usually going to be able to win. It almost leads me to believe that maybe he just had jitters going back home to Lubbock, Texas. And maybe that actually, he says no, but maybe that did get to him, because that's a game that stands out like a sore thumb in comparison to all the other games that he just played so poorly. Has had 300 yards in most of these games this year. Obviously, Leddie Brown's emergence is a big factor to lead this team, and defensively being much better than expected, better than last year, and despite all the controversy. So it absolutely feels like this team is headed in the right direction, even regardless of how they finish, because this now is a picture of how they can play, even though you still want to finish games. And a reasonable person did not expect a Big 12 title, Big 12 contention, even a solid bowl game this year. This was a year that you needed to show signs of improvement, as Neil Brown said. They are an improved team. They are one of the most improved teams in the country, and then we'll see what happens next year. What I do want to get to, though, Cody, is the star of the game, and kind of a surprising star, because some of us didn't know whether or not he was going to play in this game. It certainly was a question mark most of even this week. Neil alluded that he basically knew Leddie Brown was going to play in this game back to Sunday. Neil Brown kind of saying that he saw Leddie Brown on Sunday. He said he wanted to go, told him he was 100%, kind of taking his word for it, trusting the doctors, and he was basically going to go all week. Kind of leads to believe maybe he was doing some posturing with TCU that he didn't want to let the cat out of the bag. Because
right.
when I did the preview show with their color analyst, they did not know whether Leddie Brown was going to play legitimately, and they were wondering. He tried to ask me off the air, actually. So Leddie Brown today, number one, were you surprised that he played? And number two, in terms of where he ranks, you almost feel like maybe he's not getting enough recognition nationally and in the conference, because speaking with people outside West Virginia and certainly around the Big 12, I'm hearing people say that he's the second best running back in the conference outside of Chuba Hubbard, which sounds crazy to think when you really think about that.
Right. Yeah. As long as Leddie's legs work and his arms are good enough to carry the ball, he's going to play. I don't think there's a force on this earth that could keep him off the field if he thinks he could do it. In terms of recognition, I have to agree, and I can't help but think that last year has something to do with it. You talk about Chuba Hubbard. He's definitely recognized as one of the better backs in the country.
Right. He entered the season as a Heisman candidate.
Right. But he's not had he's had a fine season. It's not anywhere close to what he did last year.
No, not at all.
Because of what he did last year, he has all the kind of national goodwill and hype built up. And that's what I think Leddie is kind of doing this year, is where he's building his sort of national profile with games like this and with dominant runs, and especially scoring all the touchdowns, to where I think, he finishes the season strong. I think next year you definitely hear more talk about him, see more people talking about him. And the other thing, which is just unfortunate, is he's probably getting overshadowed by Breece Hall a little bit when people talk about Big 12 running backs. but I mean, Breece Hall's playing out of his mind this year, so nothing Letty can do about that.
Yeah. I mean, Chuba Hubbard again. He had a 2,000+ yard season last year, not even healthy.
Yeah,
he wasn't even healthy. And this year, supposedly supposed to be healthy, or at least healthier. His offensive line has also not been as good. I think he hasn't got as much help with his Oklahoma State teammates as he did last year when he wasn't healthy. But he's obviously going to get the fanfare. Lady Brown, for me, yeah, he in terms of whether or not he's one of the best is maybe a debatable topic. I think he's certainly up there. He's had a great year. Maybe he needs to continuously do that and put another season together because last year was so porous on the ground for the overall team. But I think in terms of value, a valuable player, you take him off this Mountaineer team, they're just totally different, maybe not even winning a lot of these games they won with him. 150 yards on the ground again today for Lady Brown as he once again toted the rock, a game that many were not sure whether he was going to play. 24 carries, 156, 6.5 per. Did not get in the end zone today. Only a 34-yarder as his longest today, but churned the yards, great yards per carry, and again was the star. Yeah. Cody Nespor here at WVU Sports now. Mike Asti here, West Virginia winning 24-6 as they stay alive in the Big 12 race. And now his co-star, I guess, for this West Virginia offense, Jarret Doege. 19 for 26, a completion percentage of over 70 at 73. So really was the point guard managing this game to extreme efficiency. Under 300 yards today, so it stops that streak that he had. Does have, a couple times getting himself into the end zone. 2 TDs overall there. Yeah, I wasn't sure it was 1 or 2. No interception, so again, being very, very efficient. But it still appears. You see this on social media. You even hear uncertainty from even commentators. Well, we need to see it again from him. There seems to still be doubters around Jarret Doege, borderline haters around Jarret Doege, and I don't get it. I don't know what else can be expected of him. It's not like anybody of a sound mind can expect a Heisman Trophy this season. He has played relatively well, has been an efficient quarterback when they've won. He had the bad Texas Tech game, but aside from that day, he certainly played well enough to win every other Saturday. And I just don't get it. Is there anything you can anything you can try to make sense of why there is still doubt around Jarret Doege? Do you still have any concerns if he's the guy moving forward? Certainly doesn't sound like Neil Brown does.
No. I think today, I mean, the numbers won't wow you today, but I think this was Doege's best game at West Virginia. We've talked a lot in the past that he's kind of prone to missing throws, especially easy throws. Yeah. That didn't happen today. I mean, there was one bad.
He's had some drops too.
Yeah, maybe two bad deep balls today, but other than that, he was sharp. Only 200 yards, but 3 total touchdowns with the quarterback sneak. I thought this was his best game he's played. I think the reason that people don't kind of recognize Jarret is, one, because the expectation for Big 12 quarterbacks is a little skewed from the air raid days. So it's like if people aren't putting up, Baker Mayfield, Kyler Murray numbers, it's like, whatever. And the other thing is,
could be, yeah.
I think Jarret has kind of struggled with quick and confident decision making. And that kind of leads to where he doesn't always look good. Like, he might be making throws and stuff like that, but he hasn't always looked calm and looked like he's, known what's going on and looked like he's good in the offense. Today, I thought he was very sharp, very quick. Like, every snap knew right where he wanted to go with the ball and got it there as soon as it needed to be. But that's when evaluating Doege earlier this year. That was my thing, is he never really looked comfortable in the pocket. It seemed like he was always second guessing what his reads were or where he wanted to go or when he wanted to go there. And I think that's why, even he had 4 straight 300-yard games, but watching them, it didn't look like he was playing well, which I'm not a big eye test guy, but that has some, perception definitely has something to it. But today, if he can duplicate what he did today, I thought he was very calm, great, very quick making decisions, good zip on the ball, very confident. I liked him a lot today, and that's what I think we've kind of been building towards this point, and hopefully, especially with the off week, he can go into Oklahoma and have a good performance. And then, kind of like Letty, if he finishes this year well, we can go into next year and talking about, maybe he's one of the top 3 or 4 quarterbacks in the conference next year.
212 yards today for Jarret Doege. Only one other game this year did he throw for less yards, and that's 211 in that game against Baylor. So not a gaudy day in terms of stats for him. However, the stats back it up. I mean, he might be that player that the eye test doesn't say what the analytics and the stats support. And normally the stats and analytics, I'm also somebody that feels like they just support what actually occurred in reality. Mm-hmm. But reality to your eye and perception may not say that with Jarret Doege. He does. I feel like he's getting more comfortable as the season progresses, though. Earlier in the year, he was missing throws. And of course, there were drops, but he wasn't making it easier on those receivers who also were trying to emerge. I think, to be fair to them, all the stars, Winston Wright, Jarret Doege, and Leddie Brown, none of them were able to emerge last year. So they're all trying to emerge this year. So Winston Wright also was going through a progression where I feel like he's better now than he was earlier in the season, not dropping in as many passes and getting more separation. But Jarret Doege wasn't helping him out earlier in the year either. And that Texas Tech game, again, he looked like a deer in headlights in that game. He looked like he was really nervous. It looked like maybe he wanted it too much. He did not look calm, collected. He looked like he was going to lose that game. Yeah. And they were never really in that game. The offense couldn't really get it together. Otherwise, he's mostly looked like he's at least good enough for you to win. Today, I feel like he really looked composed and really looked like a team leader for this team. But the stats didn't totally jump out at you today. But still, yeah, again, efficiency is there, though. And this also, by the way, despite the fact that he has his second lowest yards total, he ends up with his highest completion percentage of any single game today. So the offense was clicking, and even as Neil Brown said, this might be the best our team has played, even though we've scored more points in the past, because we were really efficient today. We didn't try to do too much. We didn't make the mistakes. We didn't turn it over. And we didn't need 40 points today. We just needed these 24, and we're still able to get a big victory. Mike Asti, Cody Nespor here of WVU Sports now. The Mountaineers now 5-3 after a big 24-6 win over TCU. Do you feel like, and this is a question that was posed by Fox on the pregame show that I actually thought was ridiculous at the time, but then watching this team today and seeing the result, and certainly these individual players looking better and this team playing really well today, granted it's TCU, but still, somebody said the Mountaineers are the most underrated team in the country. Now, Neil Brown has said they're certainly one of the most improved teams in the country. Granted, while we've said that too, we also touched on the bar being really low from last year, that it would not have been too difficult, even if you didn't get to this level, to be more improved than last season. So that's kind of the eye of the beholder. But do you feel, as where they now sit, still back in the Big 12 title race, getting this big victory? They do have the Kansas State win. They have been dominant at home despite some losses on the road, that this team actually might be the most underrated team in the country, even though they mostly have played all year without a ranking based on, what we've seen to this point?
Yeah, I think it's easy to underrate inconsistent teams. Because, if you turn on a game that they're bad, you'll think they're bad. But if you watch, the Kansas State game or the TCU game, you think they're really, really good.
Right.
West Virginia's a young team. They've been inconsistent this year. And so I think it's easy for people who don't watch every game like you and I do to kind of have a lower opinion of them because they see things like the Texas Tech loss. They just kind of assume, oh, well, they lost to Texas Tech. But I think the defense, which we've, people have talked ad nauseum about, the defense makes it so they can play with, 99% of the teams in the country.
Right.
And so I think it would be fair to say that they are underrated. Maybe not the most underrated, just because they do have those inconsistencies. But I would definitely say it feels like, I have no tangible evidence of this. It feels like the opinion of them in the Big 12 is getting higher as this season has gone on. Just hearing, analysts talk on Fox or ESPN, it feels like people are kind of coming around to, okay, this team's, might be the real deal. If not this year, maybe next year, though, we'll even talk about them in the Big 12 championship.
It feels that way for sure. And it feels that way for people around the Big 12 that they also feel like Neil Brown is the right guy for the Mountaineers, that he is a fit for this program. Certainly people around the program feel that way. He's going to be given time, and that this program is headed in the right direction. That does seem to be the universal sentiment, although, as you're saying, that wasn't said the week of the Texas Tech loss.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone during the week of the Texas Tech loss was keeping their mouth shut. You get a big win like this, you get a big win over Kansas State, those comments are going to be said. So, again, it's been an inconsistent team. I also thought that was a bit much. That was a bit of maybe a braggadocious comment to get a big pop and get talked about on shows like this. That's why I didn't name drop, because that might have been the goal of what was being of what was happening there, to try to throw out an outlandish hot take. But it was interesting to me because at this point they have played really well at times, really poor at other times. The Texas game, some may feel, is a controversial loss. So if they would have had that be a win without maybe that call towards the end, then this team really looks good at this point. Granted, still would have the Texas Tech loss, which then can maybe feel like more of an aberration. Nonetheless, though, it's certainly a majorly improved team from where they were a season ago. It doesn't really matter whether they're the most underrated or they're properly rated or any of that in the country, but it was certainly interesting because defensively, this defense might be underrated in the country. The problem is you could certainly argue that while the offense, and we talked about Lady Brown and Jarret Doege and Winston Wright finally finding themselves and looking to finally be coming together, and this is the peak of what they could be today in this performance against TCU, they've also let down the defense earlier in the year multiple times, which is why this team has lost 3 games. So Cody Nespor here, WVU Sports Now, Mike Asti here, the Mountaineers 24-6 winners here on the West Virginia Postgame Show. Not going to be a long one here today, though, but as we round things out, I do want to ask you about the rest of the season because, again, the playoff is done for the Big 12, but this is a chaotic Big 12 title picture that I know we've all talked here, and I certainly talked with Tom as well, that we're basically all just looking for chaos at this point now to keep ourselves entertained. And that's what we have for you. What's West Virginia's legit viability in the Big 12 this season? And I certainly, if they get in the Big 12 title game, even appearing there, it would be a year ahead of schedule. I don't think anyone thought that would happen this year. They would need help to get there and would need this chaos, as inconsistent as they've been. But is that a real thing, or are they just right now mathematically still in it for you?
I mean, I don't want to. It's 2020. I don't want to rule anything out. But
Okay.
I mean, we would have to have just these last 3 weeks of the Big 12 season. It would have to be like insane. Kansas would probably have to pull some wild upset, which you never want to bank on. And so, I mean, it's great that they're still in the hunt. They're very likely not going to make it this year, but it is great that they're in the hunt, And another thing is that's just going to help their, what bowl they end up, presumably what bowl they end up in.
Right.
And talking about the last 2 games, I like their chances against Oklahoma. I honestly do. Well, one, it's at home. We talked last week. Spencer Rattler.
If they win both of those 2 games, they could get in that title game because somebody's going to lose another game.
Right.
I feel like these teams are not all going to win out. Certainly, Oklahoma State is very vulnerable to lose the end of the year with the way Mike Gundy's career has gone. So they win both of those 2 games. I would not be shocked at all if they somehow crawl in that game. As weird as that would sound.
Yeah, but like we talked last week, Spencer Rattler has been better, but you can't count out West Virginia's defense against anybody, even Oklahoma and Lincoln Riley. And then, like I said last week, that Iowa State game, it just looks like it's going to be awesome with Letty Brown and Brees Hall, Brock Purdy and Doege. Both defenses are pretty good. So it wouldn't be crazy to say that West Virginia wins out. For them to get into the title game, I mean, that would be a wild, next month or so. But it's not, with the way this season has gone, it's not impossible.
It's not impossible by any means here. Yeah, again, and most of this may be, despite being very realistic about the future of the program where they are right now, and they've been inconsistent, it's mostly the fact that I have no confidence in Oklahoma State finishing the season strong. Kansas State certainly a team that could be tripped up. They already have lost the game in hand between the Mountaineers. Texas is a team that certainly did not impress despite getting the victory over WVU last week. So the Mountaineers defense put up maybe their best performance of the entire season in that game, even though it wasn't a victory. One of the better defensive performances really for any team all year.
I don't even know.
Not being a win.
At this point, I don't even know who the favorite to win the Big 12 would be. Like, because I don't want to say Texas and I don't want to say Oklahoma.
I was gonna say, is it not still Oklahoma State though? They've been tripped up the least.
Yeah.
To this point.
You're right. I guess it's Oklahoma State. But I like Iowa State. But
if you like Iowa State, I'm assuming you have them beating the Mountaineers. Then is that what you're saying?
I think that game will be good. Like, I can't. It's just that I think that game's going to be awesome. So I don't want to sit here and say, "Oh, I think Iowa State will win."
We maybe should start the picks back up again. The three of us were doing picks for a while, and then we just stopped. I guess because
it's just it's so hard.
It's impossible. Yeah.
But I don't know. There's like no favorite to win the title this year.
No, and Oklahoma. I will say the scary thing is though Oklahoma. Regardless of whether they get in the Big 12 title game or not, they are clearly way better than they were earlier in the season.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost two teams.
Yeah.
So if they get tripped up and they don't, again, obviously they won't be there. If they win out, they certainly will have a shot. They certainly might be the favorite to get in there. They could be a team that easily could crawl in there and win it again, even though this is a rebuilding year for them, and even though they had those hiccups with those two losses earlier in the season. But there's a lot of room for optimism, certainly around Mountaineer Nation. I actually just got a notification that our colleague Corey Geiger threw up a video there for the Penn State reaction. So Mountaineer fans, it could be that bad. It certainly could be that bad. I almost don't even want to tell you to keep watching this until we close it. I almost would tell you to just go over there because I'm going to watch that show. Yeah. That's going to be where it's at here in terms of the entertainment value. The Mountaineers get a 24-6 victory. It was over TCU, so it's not necessarily a team to brag about beating, but I think the way they played in the game, like Neil Brown was saying.
Yeah, and the way they played, and because it's Gary Patterson.
Sure.
Like, he's, no matter what TCU's talent level is, they're never going to be a cupcake kind of, just roll over team because of Gary Patterson. And so I think that makes the game today even more impressive for West Virginia, just because they did kind of manhandle them a little bit.
And Gary Patterson teams are going to be prepared. Yeah. Oh,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, how many years has he been there? 23, 24?
It feels like our lives, basically.
Yeah, that doesn't happen, on accident. It happens because he's one of the best coaches in the country over 2 decades, pretty much.
Yeah, the only shock there is that he had 10 years ago and before they got in the Big 12 and when they were getting into elite status, granted in the easier conference, that he never left for a bigger job.
Yeah.
Because that's always the fear on Neil Brown, that if he would have a Gary Patterson-like success at WVU, then eventually somebody would pluck him out of there. But that's not been the case. He loves it at TCU. And certainly the level of expectation for them should be higher than where it is. So they are rebuilding as well. And as Neil Brown said, they are also a very, very young team. I feel like this team is properly rated. I feel like it's a properly rated team that I feel like universally everyone says they're headed in the right direction, but they're inconsistent and they need to be more consistent. And the big wins need to outnumber the bad losses. That's all very reasonable. That's what we've been doing. That's how our coverage has been, really. And that's kind of the reasonable take. Obviously, there's people out there who are unreasonable, but I feel like that's the reasonable thought process. So I don't feel like they're really necessarily underrated. They're certainly not overrated. They're properly rated, certainly at least how we're rating them. What would be, because there's a bye coming up. Mm-hmm. So I guess, I'll get us out of here with this. What's going to be the key to the Mountaineers finishing the season strong and getting wins over Oklahoma and Iowa State? If they do get those victories, regardless of the Big 12 title picture, because obviously they need some help there, but if they do get those wins, what happened? Is it just maybe the same recipe of efficiency in Lady Brown and defense? Does something else need to occur based on these matchups? And if they don't, and they get back to where they were even a week ago or even 2 weeks ago, because it's been a roller coaster ride, how did the wheels fall off? Because Neil Brown certainly cannot rest in his laurels. They do still need to finish the season strong to legitimately say they've been the most improved team in the country. The job is not done yet, but they now have a bye. They have a lot of time to fix things. They have a big victory, but it will be tough to close the year. Speaking in the Big 12, they have potentially the toughest road to end the season for any team in the conference.
Yeah, I think you got it exactly right. It's just keep doing what they've been doing for the last month. Be efficient enough on offense and ride the defense to wins. I think The thing that would discourage me the most is at this point, I think we can safely say that the team has taken a step or two or three as the season has gone on. The worst thing that could happen is they take a step or two or three backwards. And I think that's a fear because Oklahoma and Iowa State are very good teams.
Right.
If they come out and just lay eggs against both of them, then it's like, oh, where was all the improvement? Where was all the feel good? I would find, unless something crazy happened, I would find it hard to believe that they play poorly, not play poorly, but maybe get blown out by either one. Even as good as Oklahoma's been on offense lately, just because they have so much talent on defense and they're so sound. But yeah,
so is it possible for you that you're not even looking for wins and losses, that they could lose both games and you could still say Neil Brown's correct and where the program's headed because they are good teams they're facing?
I think, if the trend continues where they're in these games late, even late into fourth quarters, because Neil Brown loves to point out they've been in every game within the last 4 minutes. Last 4 minutes.
Yeah.
If that keeps up, it would suck if they don't win either of them, but I don't think you would feel bad. I wouldn't feel bad. Fans would feel bad. Because that's another thing of a young team is you've just got to learn how to finish games.
Right.
It's, step one is you got to be in the game to the end. Step two is you got to, put a team away or, do the final comeback to win.
Right.
So going 0-2 would suck for morale and
it would
feeling.
Suck. Yes, absolutely.
But as long as they were close, it wouldn't, in my perspective, wouldn't be knocking the team off track from where Neil Brown wants them to go. I don't think they'll go 0-2. I don't know which one they'd win, but I feel pretty good that they're going to at least split. That's just my feeling with how well they've played on defense this year and how good not good, but how efficient the offense has been lately. I would find it weird if they blew a tire here at the very end.
I don't think they're going to either. I would have said they probably will just putter away the season if we were talking 2 weeks ago even, or 3 weeks ago, certainly before the Kansas State game, because the program was very down at that point. That was a Texas Tech game talking about laying eggs. They laid an egg despite all the hype entering that game. They've been able to play well since then, even going to the Texas loss. That defensively, certainly they played really well since then. They have shown the last 3 weeks, even with one loss, that they do have hope and there is reason to believe in the future and the climb, literally speaking, that Neil Brown has been administering here. And to be fair to him, only in year 2.
Right.
The cupboard being bare last year, so miles ahead in terms of improvement off last season. This is a tough close to the season by Oklahoma and Iowa State. That is not easy by any means. So they could lose both those games and still be headed in the right direction. I feel like for him to have a solid offseason without anybody becoming a hater, they're going to need to at least win one.
Yeah.
They're going to have to split those. Losing both is going to give you a sour taste because then it's going to be, well, you really have a closing problem if you're just blowing the majority of games down the stretch. That then could even lend into coaching.
Right.
So I don't think that's going to happen. It seems like Jarret Doege, as long as he keeps being efficient, as long as it stays the course like it was today, I think they will be okay. Certainly could still lose one of those. If they only win one, though, which one do you think would be the bigger win for the future of the program? And I understand Iowa State's been better most of this season, but they cannot beat Oklahoma since entering this Big 12. Even with Devon Austin, they could not beat Oklahoma, scoring 45 freaking points. I feel like if you're ever going to beat them, this has to be the year. Texas didn't do it. They lost the Red River Shootout. West Virginia has to get that win for me.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Just because of the history between the two, I think beating Oklahoma would be the bigger of the two over Iowa State. And because I think Lincoln Riley's, one of those premier coaches to where I think that, Oklahoma isn't rated as highly as they have been, but that win could be sort of the statement win that I think Neil Brown, maybe not statement win, but,
I get what you're saying.
Feather in the cap win that Neil Brown doesn't really have yet. The two Kansas State upsets are pretty good, but that's, Chris Kleiman is the same as Neil Brown in that he's been he's only been there for 2 years.
Right.
But I think Oklahoma would be, if fans could vote on which one to win, I think they would pick Oklahoma.
Yeah, if fans could vote, and if the vote would actually be finished when it's done. So yes, if there was if there was an election, I'm sure that's where they would vote. And then
Right.
I think that'd be one election though where it would almost be unanimous in terms of people's opinion that they would want that one, even though there's no unanimous election.
Plus, at 5 wins now, I have even if they lose the last two, I have to imagine that they're going to go to a bowl game.
Well, they're going to get to a bowl game because of COVID. I mean, they're restricted. That, quite frankly, Penn State could get to one based on COVID. They're not being stuck to the win level.
Right. But I just think even if they lose out, the defense has put enough on tape where I think any bowl would take them. And so that, winning a bowl game is obviously always a nice way to end the season.
For sure. I think winning a bowl game that they're going to get in, they're definitely going to get in a bowl game at this point, I'd imagine. Yeah. Certainly as long as they win one of the last two. But even if they don't, because of COVID, a 5-win Mountaineer team with that brand and Neil Brown, I think the world would want to put them in some game. But if they don't win these last two, it's going to be a bowl game that no one's going to really be interested in, probably. Yeah, probably. So you do need to get one of those two victories. You don't want the bowl game to happen prior to December 20th, which certainly could occur if they don't win anymore. They're definitely headed in the right direction for me. They proved that today. They proved the peak. They proved that picture Neil Brown talks about of the future of the program. They do need to finish strong. I do think Oklahoma would be big. But then if you go ahead and win that and lose to Iowa State, people would be saying, well, if you can do this to one, why couldn't you do it to the other? So you're always going to have, it's some inconsistency as they've been this year, but they're building to something. I will also say that if you ever want the program to be a legit Big 12 championship contender or beyond, and again, reasonably, that's not where it is now. That's not where it should be now. It's building to that. But if Neil Brown ever gets it there, like he's saying that that's his goal to get it there at some point again, eventually, no matter what type of year those programs are having, they are going to need a win, a statement win, as you put it, against two of the top dogs. And I'm not talking Kansas State. He's going to need to beat Texas or Oklahoma with him as the head coach in order for that to mean something for where he is taking the program, even in a down year. He needs to pluck one of those two wins on his resume, or else the program is never going to get above a certain level in the public perception, certainly by any committee perception. If anyone's voting or doing anything to get them in anything, they're going to need one of those wins eventually under Neil Brown. Any final takes for you, Cody?
Not really. I just think, like you were saying, I think people need to let up on Doege a little bit.
I don't get it, man. And I know I'm not, firing a shot here because we have some media rivals apparently, but it's all about Doege. And you even see those replies that goes into the weeds of, well, this would be said about Doege. I don't know how could anyone even be trying to criticize Doege in this Zoom? I'd like to put other people in and just hear what they would say out of curiosity. Yeah. Like, what else do you want?
He's been fine. Like, he's not putting up, I think, I don't know if people are still thinking about Will Grier or not. But
that's crazy. You can't be Will Grier. Will Grier was an NFL product from the jump almost.
But Doege's been good this year. Even Austin Kendall was fine last year, but the team was so bad and they kept losing that people really piled up on him.
There are people that want him playing.
I
was watching along the Neil Brown press conference. And I made the mistake, I apologize. I should never do this. I should be a veteran enough to know not to do this. But I was reading the Facebook comments.
No.
And the Facebook comments were telling me that there were people this was the argument. Jarret Doege's been playing well. Jarret Doege was good today. But against Oklahoma, you got to start Austin Kendall because Jarret Doege can't do it against Oklahoma. That is a rationale for some fans out there.
I've seen people saying they should play Garrett Gilbert because he brings the dual threat aspect. It's like, okay, what are you talking about? Like, relax a little bit. But that's my main takeaway from this is Jarret is as good as I think I've thought he is, and I think he showed it today. And I think people just, have some weird perception about him that they're going to keep dogging him. But he's fine. He's, one of the better quarterbacks in the league statistically this year. And he's been playing well. So, people can think what they want, but the numbers are the numbers and the wins and losses are the wins and losses.
Yeah. No matter what your eye may tell you, the numbers are the numbers. The numbers maybe are deceiving for him this year. The eye test is maybe deceiving for him this year in certain games. He's doing enough to certainly allow this team to win. He's certainly doing enough to impress Neil Brown to allow him to be the starter. it doesn't matter what your opinion is. There is no way in the world, unless Jarret Doege gets injured or unfortunately gets COVID-19, that he is not starting Oklahoma. Those are the only two options. And if either one occurs, there's going to be some controversy behind it because there's a bye coming up. So I don't know what's happening. So as long as he acts smart and you put some bubble wrap around him, that Oklahoma game is going to have him as the starter. He certainly deserved it to this point. 300 plus yards in 4 of those games, 50 pass attempts in some of those, which maybe is a little bit too much for him. Maybe you don't want to have him throw that often, but when he gets that bread and butter of about 25, 30, 35 attempts, you're looking at 200 plus yards. You're looking at no interceptions, 2 TDs, 70 plus completion percentage. Again, yeah, I don't know what, as you put it, I don't know what else you want, people, from Jarret Doege. I don't think reasonably there's anything else to expect. If you want to have videos where it's the will to win the Heisman, like it was with Will Grier, who was an NFL product and a grad transfer from the jump, if that's what you expect for the Mountaineers in the future, then you're being unreasonable, because that was more rarity. And we could have a whole different show on how they maybe as a team arguably wasted the talent that was Will Grier. But now that that's over.
That would be, I could say a lot on that show.
Yes, we maybe will do that. A whole different show, because we don't have 6 hours. That's a whole different show on Will Grier was here for 2 years, didn't even play in a bowl game, which I'm not criticizing him for, but they didn't win. You have one big win. You do get a Texas win, and then the season ends up being nothing afterwards. And yes, he was an NFL product. As somebody said, I'm coaching a pro here playing the college game, but it did not seem to matter in terms of wins and losses. So yes, that could be an entirely different show that I feel like has also been done at nauseum to this point that maybe we'll leave in the past and bury.
Right.
If everyone can get that out of their mindset, I think maybe they would judge Jarret Doege better and maybe more fairly. For Cody Nespor, for all of us at WVU Sports now, also throughout the Now family of networks, and certainly Pittsburgh Sports Live, the West Virginia Mountaineers get yet another victory. They impressed today. They look good today. They show you that picture of where the program's headed in terms of their level of play today. We will see the rest of the season. They've certainly been an inconsistent team, but a 24-6 victory over TCU today, as they do stay alive in the Big 12 title picture, moving to 5-3 on the year.